And therefore, in relating this tradition about the burial, the resurrection of Jesus, I think it's quite certain that Paul knew the context of this and knew the empty tomb story. Now, a second indication that Paul gives, I think, of the empty tomb is the dating of the empty tomb on the third day, or rather of the resurrection on the third day, when he says that Christ was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. Where do we get this phrase, on the third day? Well, I think the most likely explanation is that this is a time indicator for the discovery of the empty tomb by the women who came on early Sunday morning, which after Jewish reckoning was on the third day after the crucifixion, so that the resurrection naturally came to be dated on the third day because this was the day that the empty tomb was discovered by the women followers of Jesus. So I think that implicit in the information delivered by Paul is the fact of the empty tomb, as well as his explicit mention of the resurrection appearances. And Paul's information, I think, would be the most important material in the New Testament outside the Gospels that goes to confirm what the Gospels say.
How do you respond to critics who say the bodily resurrection of Jesus is not necessary? It is enough to believe that Jesus' spirit was raised from the dead.
I think, in fact, that the idea of a spiritual resurrection is an oxymoron. It's really a contradiction in terms. I would challenge any critical scholar to explain to me clearly and carefully what the difference is between the resurrection of an immaterial, unextended, intangible, invisible body and the immortality of Jesus' soul. Everyone agrees that the New Testament, and particularly Paul, did not teach the mere immortality of Jesus' soul. But I cannot understand for the life of me what the difference is between this supposed spiritual resurrection body and the simple idea of the immortality of the soul. And the immortality of the soul is a Greek notion. It's not a New Testament notion in terms of the final state of immortality. And therefore, I think that the fact that so many people find themselves averse to this physicality of the resurrection is a sort of vestige of Greek philosophy. It's a hangover of the depreciation of the material body, the physical body, and a sort of longing for a spiritual, heavenly existence, the soul escaping from the prison house of the body, that is simply, I think, unbiblical. So I would say in the first place that the idea of a spiritual resurrection really cannot be sustained because it's not distinct from the immortality of Jesus' soul. In addition to that, however, I would argue that the New Testament quite clearly teaches the resurrection of the body. Paul is very clear that it is the body that is buried, the body that is sown, that is the same body that will be raised. It is numerically identical. There is not the replacement of the earthly body with a new body, a substitute body. There is numerical identity, but a transformation that occurs between the earthly body and the resurrection body. A transformation that involves a transition from mortality to immortality, dishonor to glory, from corruptibility to incorruptibility, and so forth. But there's no suggestion that the earthly body is rescued from materiality. For Paul to talk about an unextended, invisible, intangible, immaterial body would simply be a contradiction in terms. So the very notion that Paul is talking about a resurrection body, I think, indicates the physicality of the resurrection state.
What role do one's philosophical assumptions play in doing historical research, particularly related to the resurrection of Jesus?
I think that one's philosophical presuppositions will be an important guide in doing historical work with respect to the New Testament narratives, because these narratives overtly present a supernatural Jesus, a Jesus who performs miracles, a Jesus who rises from the dead. And if you come to these narratives with a presupposition of scientific naturalism or even methodological naturalism, that is to say that as a historian you will not allow supernatural causes to enter the picture, then these events will be ruled out of court in advance, regardless of the evidence. And I think this is fundamentally the problem with the methodology employed by the infamous Jesus Seminar of the Westar Institute in California. In the introduction to their edition of the Five Gospels, they make it very clear that for them the first pillar of scholarly wisdom, as they put it, is scientific naturalism. They point out that Strauss in the last century distinguished between the Christ of faith and the Jesus of history precisely on the criterion of supernaturalism, and that anything that had supernatural aspects to it was by definition relegated to myth rather than history. Now, this is not a matter of argument. It's not a matter of evidence. This is simply a matter of definition. The supernatural is defined as being in the category of mythical, not historical. And if you begin with those sorts of presuppositions, then of course the resurrection will be evaluated as unhistorical because you've defined it to be unhistorical. So when the seminar comes, for example, to the words spoken by the risen Jesus, they state by definition the words ascribed to the risen Christ cannot be historically verified. But they add, sometimes words spoken during Jesus' lifetime are placed on the lips of the risen Jesus, and so they say, we will evaluate these sayings as though they were uttered by a historical person. Well, it couldn't be clearer that they think of the risen Christ as not a historical individual, and that this is done so not on the basis of evidence, but on the basis of presuppositions. So these presuppositions are going to be critical. R.T. France, who is a British New Testament scholar, has remarked that on the level of their literary and historical quality, the Gospels deserve to be taken seriously as sources for a life of Jesus. He says that compared to the sources for ancient history in Greco-Roman times, the Gospels compare very favorably. But he points out that the degree to which one will be ready to trust these documents depends more upon one's openness to a supernatural worldview than it does upon their literary and historical qualities. So I think this is absolutely crucial. And all that I suppose needs to be added here is that philosophically, I see no reason to adopt such a philosophical naturalism. It seems to me that only an atheist could be justified in saying that miracles are impossible, because unless you have some proof of atheism, you have to be open to the possibility that God exists, and if that is even possible, then it's possible that he's acted in history. So in the absence of any proof for atheism, which I don't think anyone has, we have to be open to the possibility of the supernatural and let the evidence speak for itself.
What is the personal significance of the resurrection?
I think that the personal significance of the resurrection of Jesus lies in the fact that it means that Jesus holds the key that unlocks the door to eternal life. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And I believe that Jesus' resurrection shows that he holds the solution to this most difficult of all human predicaments, namely death itself. It shows us that through Jesus Christ, we also can hope for life beyond the grave, and hope for a life, therefore, of meaningful and eternal significance through him. So that I think that the resurrection of Jesus has its personal significance in solving this existential problem of death and the meaning of life.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at www.veritas.org.